Thanks to you at home for joining us this hour. Happy Friday. We're going to start tonight with a big update on the story that we have been covering since just about exactly this time last night, when we last left the million-mile-an-hour, on the blink, wildly spinning out of control carousel that is the news cycle now. The richest man on earth, Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon.com and the owner of the Washington Post, he had just published what he says were the extortionate threats he received from a supermarket tabloid in the United States. The same tabloid, of course, that has been named by federal prosecutors as a participant in a felony case involving illegal campaign contributions to the president's campaign in 2016. The president's longtime lawyer, of course, is about to start a fairly long federal prison sentence, in part for his role in those felonies. That lawyer himself, Michael Cohen, and the federal prosecutors who worked that case have put in writing in court materials and have said in court that the president himself was not just the beneficiary of that illegal payment scheme, he was the person who directed the commission of those crimes for which Michael Cohen is now going to prison. Now, the other party who prosecutors say took part in those crimes was this supermarket tabloid. And that tabloid escaped prosecution, and its executives and officers escaped prosecution for their role in that felony scheme because they cooperated with prosecutors under terms that were laid out in this non-prosecution agreement, which prosecutors have since made public. And we can tell from this non-prosecution agreement that we can read that this tabloid cooperated with prosecutors to help them build that felony case that implicates the president and that is sending the president's lawyer to jail. In order to participate with prosecutors in that, in order to help them build their case, the tabloid itself had to come clean with those federal prosecutors about its own illegal payments to benefit the president's campaign. And we can tell from the fine print toward the back of that agreement that as a consequence of entering into this agreement with prosecutors, the tabloid, that company, they are bound now. They are legally bound by this agreement to stop committing crimes, to not commit any more crimes for a period of at least 3 years. Otherwise, everything the tabloid and its officers and its employees told prosecutors as part of their cooperation in that felony case, everything, including all the details of the firm's own confessed illegal payments to the president's campaign, and everything else they had to tell the prosecutors in order to get themselves that deal, if the tabloid commits any other crimes, the non-prosecution deal is off. And that would mean instantly that everything they have confessed to and everything prosecutors came to learn about that firm and its officers and its employees, all of it would lose its shield from prosecution. So last night, as we reported, Jeff Bezos, owner of the Washington Post, he published what he says is correspondence from that same tabloid. One of their senior editors telling Mr. Bezos that the tabloid will publish embarrassing naked pictures of him unless he does what they demand. After Bezos went public and published that correspondence last night, after that bizarre turn in our lives as Americans, which happened this time last night. Today, multiple news outlets reported that, in fact, as we had anticipated last night, the federal prosecutors in the Southern District of New York are now on this. These same prosecutors who did that deal with the tabloid, with American Media, the parent company of that tabloid, the same prosecutors who did that deal with them and secured that cooperation as part of its prosecution of those felony charges involving the president's campaign. Multiple news outlets report today that those same prosecutors are now reviewing this alleged extortion attempt by the tabloid and its executives to see if that effort constitutes a crime, constitutes the sort of thing that would break the terms of that non-prosecution deal. If that non-prosecution deal has been breached because the tabloid committed a crime in this extortion effort or anything else they've done, then the non-prosecution deal will be off, and everything that tabloid, its officers and employees provided to prosecutors along the course of this case will instantly become fair game for an indictment of that firm and or its officers and or its employees. And on top of that, every piece of information they provided to prosecutors as part of that earlier cooperation effort, every single thing they handed over, every single thing they told them will be presumed admissible in court against them. So you think about like being caught up in something like this. Like on the one hand, you're psyched to get a cooperation deal. You're psyched to get a non-prosecution agreement. But the terms of those kinds of deals are onerous. And if you break those deals, everything is against you. The government, the prosecutors you make that deal with, hold it over you in a way that is almost impossible to fight against. So we could see this coming last night. But again, this is a big deal. Multiple news outlets now confirming that prosecutors in the Southern District of New York are now pursuing this. And today, the Wall Street Journal also added some really important reporting on another big piece of this. And this is the part of this story that I think a lot of people have felt like, oh, that's too hard to understand, or that's too complex, or that's part of this that I don't get. I'm going to sort of set that aside. Today, the Wall Street Journal made it super obvious and plain. Because today, the Wall Street Journal described efforts by the government of Saudi Arabia to essentially buy themselves good Western media coverage. To buy good Western media coverage for themselves and bad Western media coverage for their enemies. The Wall Street Journal today describes how the Saudi government, and particularly the Saudi crown prince who has taken over the Saudi government, they've essentially been lining up really lucrative, well-paid media partnerships with a whole bunch of Western media outlets, including Bloomberg and Vice and The Independent in the UK and others. And that is really clarifying reporting today, because there have previously been accounts that AMI, the parent company of that supermarket tabloid, which is caught up in all the Trump campaign finance felonies and all this stuff, they're now caught up in this Jeff Bezos thing. There have been previous reports that that company, AMI, was working on a very similar sort of expensive deal with the Saudi government. A very rich deal with the Saudis. And that never really made sense. Like, what would the Saudis want to do with this tabloid? What would the Saudis want to do with this National Enquirer company, really? Is that really all that valuable to the Saudi government? It makes a lot more sense in the context of the Saudi government trying to buy itself Western media partnerships of all kinds, with all different kinds of media, in order to improve their image in the West and hurt their enemies. If AMI is just one piece of that effort by the Saudi government, that makes more sense. And AMI's efforts to pursue that kind of a lucrative partnership deal with the Saudi government would explain why they started publishing weird stuff like this booklet, this "We Love Saudi Arabia, It's a Magic Kingdom" booklet that AMI inexplicably started putting on the National Enquirer supermarket checkout lines in the United States last year. I mean, random American supermarket shoppers who were used to looking over at the National Enquirer thing by the checkout line and seeing, like, you know, terrible Photoshop jobs that make Angelina Jolie look like an alien, right? Or all caps headlines about how Hillary Clinton has 40 different diseases and she's definitely going to jail. Like, that's what you're used to seeing on the cover of the National Enquirer at the supermarket. Instead, there was this random glossy booklet in that spot about how wonderful and handsome the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia is. And isn't Saudi Arabia kind of a magic kingdom? I mean, it was so strange when they did this. There's no ads in this thing. It's literally just a gigantic brochure for how beautiful and wonderful Saudi Arabia is. It was weird, but it makes sense. If what they were doing is demonstrating the kind of product they could produce to promote the Saudi Crown Prince and the Saudi Arabian government if the price was right. And one of the biggest problems that Saudi Arabia has in the Western world right now, one of the biggest problems they've got in the Western media right now, is the bipartisan and international outrage over the murder of a Washington Post journalist named Jamal Khashoggi, who was a critic of the Saudi government. And he was murdered inside a Saudi consulate last year under circumstances that indicate Saudi government involvement at the highest level. And no news outlet has beat the drum louder or harder against Saudi Arabia and the Saudi Crown Prince for that murder than the paper that employed that murdered columnist, the Washington Post, which is owned by Jeff Bezos, who has lately been threatened with naked picture mass humiliation by this tabloid that is not only caught up already in a felony scheme to do illegal political favors for the U.S. president, they have recently been caught swimming backstroke in the lap of the Saudi Crown Prince. including reportedly getting help from the White House to facilitate the Saudi contacts and implicitly giving the White House's blessing to an AMI Saudi Arabian deal. It's just, ugh. Nice world we live in now, right? I mean, that's what this presidency is. I mean, covering our national politics now feels like covering like arcane, historic, dark, nepotistic corners of some like Malaysian kleptocracy scandal, right? But it's our White House now. This is the milieu of our national politics.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.